So checking out the rear leaf springs, you can see there one of the retainer bands goes right in this area somewhere, is missing. The spring liners are still in place. You can barely see them. Here is the retainer band in the front. It's still here. The rubber is very brittle. Going underneath the car, you can see that the insulator is still here and in place. It's brittle and cracked. There is a cracked leaf right here, and this bottom leaf is broken forward of the mounting pad. And here you can see the liners between the leaves are still intact. So this is the passenger side. The driver's side seems to be okay, but I'm going to go ahead and replace the leaf springs anyway. So on the universal joint, you got this little strap right here, but these little locking tabs that are bent up onto the head of the bolt. So you got to bend those out of the way. And when you pull these apart, you don't want the caps and the bearings to fall out. Like I almost did. And I'll wire this up temporarily instead of removing the drive shaft, so that I won't lose any transmission fluid out of the tail shaft of the transmission when I pull it out. Next up is to disconnect the shock absorber from the shock plate, and this one's damaged, so I might wind up having to cut it off. That's just typical. No, it's gonna come off. And next, disconnect the park and brake where it goes into the backing plate. Next up, disconnect the brake line, the flex line that goes to the rear axle. So here's the front bracket. It's riveted to the frame. This is the mounting point for the leaf spring. It's got this bolt right here, goes through the eye of the spring and through the bushing, and it's 13/16. And then looking from the brake drum towards the front of the car, got this access hole right here that gives you access to the 3/4 inch nut that's on the other end of that 13/16 bolt that's holding the front eye of the leaf spring on. And be very careful taking that nut out. Because if you drop it, it drops down into a part of the frame that's very hard to access. Another thing you'll need to do is unbolt this mounting point, this little bracket for the park and brake cable, because if you don't, when you start to lower this spring, you might catch it on this casing right here and damage it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off as well. And another one right here. This is just slightly forward of the rear axle. And this is just to get the park and brake cable completely out of the way so that you don't damage it with the spring. Be careful when you take the park and brake cable out of the backing plate. This is actually two pieces, acts like a clamp, and there's a gasket in between. You don't want to lose any of that. So this was binding in the bracket, so I put a jack under the differential and lifted up very lightly on the rear end just to kind of get some pressure off of it, and it turns easier. And I believe that it's actually using the threads on the bolt to thread itself through the rubber bushing. There we go. So I just removed the front shackle bolt from the passenger side and The threads were actually binding in the frame, which caused it to unthread itself enough to give me a little gap right here that I was able to use my open-end wrench to pry it the rest of the way out. On the driver's side, this area here was seized in the frame, so I wrung the hex head off trying to get it to turn. So I wound up having to use a drift and go in through the access hole and knock the shackle bolt out on the driver's side. Next out is the rear shackles. And I still have the gas tank out of this car, so I'm pretty sure that's making it a lot easier to reach these. You would need a longer wrench to get up here. 54 and about an 1/8. One and an 1/8. Slightly larger. Not much. Probably just a little bit of wear. Half an inch. Five-eighths. Seven sixteenths. Five-eighths. So this one's taller than this one. This one's larger diameter than this one. And so here's where the center pin goes. The new center pins are 5/8 of an inch tall, and I only have 3/8 of an inch here. But because of the insulator thickness, I believe it would still work. So this is the passenger side. The bottommost leaf sheared off front and the back. Next leaf sheared off in the front. And we've got a crack right here. The crack goes all the way through. Not real happy about the difference in diameter between the center pins. I know I can remove this center pin. Looks like I can probably remove this center pin and just swap center pins and everything will be okay. Also with the new leaves, you don't get this piece here. This is the insulator retainer. Here's the new insulators. Pretty much a reproduction of the old one. Exactly the same, pretty much. New ones are thicker, but that's just wear. The new leaves don't have the continuous liner like the original equipment has continuous liner. The new leaves just have the liner tips. So it's a slightly different configuration. The new leaves are square cut. The originals taper down and curl down. These bumpers are super brittle. They're like hard as a rock. So bought new ones. Just gotta pull this bolt out, take this metal bracket off, put the new bumper under the metal bracket, holds it in place. That came out nice and easy, probably because it goes all the way into the axle housing where it gets plenty of lubrication. Probably should put some sealer on these. This bolt here that holds the brake line union also, of course, goes all the way into the axle housing, so that should probably be sealed as well. nice reproductions. I took the brake line off. Bend this little hold down clamp so I can get to the vent. With the hold down for the brake line bent up out of the way, you can see the vent hole vents the rear axle right there. Sometimes they're a slot. This one's a round hole. So as far as the rear axle is concerned, this has been in this position for several days and it's nice and dry. There's no 90 weight leaking out of it. If the pinion seal were leaking, it would be wet, or even if it sat for a lot of years, there would be road grime on it, stuck to it, and it's very clean. So I'm thinking the seal is okay. And when I turn the pinion shaft, it's very quiet. It's nice and quiet. And when I turn the wheel hub, it's nice and quiet, nice and smooth, both directions, both hubs. And I don't hear any noise, and I don't feel anything, no vibration or grinding or binding. And also the gasket around the retainer is in good shape on both sides, nice and dry, no gear oil leaking out. And before, when I turn the axle up with the pinion facing straight up, a little bit of 90 weight leaked out of the breather or the vent. So I know it's got gear oil in it. So regardless of how long it's been sitting, it's been everything inside has been wet with 90 weight. So I feel pretty comfortable that I don't think there's anything wrong with this rear axle. And as far as checking it for gear lash, you have to clamp the pinion down so that it doesn't move and that it can't move. And you clamp down one of the wheel hubs and you check the gear lash or backlash at the other wheel hub. And it's actually easier to do while it's in the car. But for now, I can just move this hub while I'm watching the pinion and I'm watching the other hub, and I don't see either of those moving. And I do have movement here, but I think this is normal. It actually is supposed to be measured at the outer diameter of the tire, so this isn't really an accurate way to check it. But the fact that the rear end is quiet, the axle and the hubs move so nice and easy, and I don't think that's excessive.